We're going to let the band go, and we're going to say a voice for Jay Sarah. 1, 2, 3.
Voice for Jay Sarah.
We love you, Jay. Love you, Jay. We miss you, Jay.
This is the story of Jalen Hasty. On August 23rd, 2023, law enforcement responded to a call at the Heron Lake apartment complex in Columbia, South Carolina. Inside one of the units, officers located 2 individuals with gunshot wounds. 29-year-old Jalen Hasty was found deceased. 31-year-old Kenardo Bates, her former boyfriend, was discovered with an injury consistent with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The scene was immediately secured as a homicide investigation. Forensic teams recovered the firearm used in the shooting and documented evidence inside the apartment. Ballistics testing, witness statements, and surveillance footage were collected to establish a clear timeline of events. Investigators determined that the case was connected to ongoing domestic conflict between Hasty and Bates. Reports indicated previous incidents of stalking, surveillance, and controlling behavior. The findings ruled out random violence and instead pointed to a targeted act carried out by someone known to the victim. After medical treatment, Bates was placed under arrest. He was charged with murder, kidnapping, and possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime. Court records confirm his transfer into law enforcement custody, and pre-trial hearings were scheduled to address the charges. Before we dive into today's story, we want to hear from you. Where are you tuning in from? And how do you feel as the story unfolds? Welcome to Deadly Crime Unmasked, the show where we expose the shocking crimes that rip through communities and the chilling secrets lurking behind closed doors. These are real people, real events, real consequences. Don't forget to subscribe and activate notifications. You won't want to miss the gripping story that's coming up. Now, let's dive in.
Dozens of people gathered this afternoon in North Columbia to honor and celebrate the life of Jalen Sarah Hasty. She lost her life to gun violence exactly 1 year ago today. I spoke to her family members about the message they're sharing. Tears.
Grief comes in different forms and fashions, Lord God.
And prayers, but also hope and a celebration of life, releasing butterflies and balloons. Friends and family members took time to honor Jalen Sarah Hasty Saturday afternoon, 1 year after her death, as a result of domestic violence. Many seeing Jalen's spirit in her daughter Kensley, especially Jalen's mother, Monica Hatton.
She is the spitting image, not just because she looks like her mom. She has a big heart, a beautiful smile, and a caring spirit, just like her mother.
She says ever since her daughter's death, her mission has been to encourage other young women walking through domestic violence.
There are people just like my daughter who don't share stories, and that's where I'm at. I want to be able to save someone else's daughter.
Monica says it all starts with an honest conversation.
We found one of Jalen's journal, and she's talked about things that happened way back in 2018. And if she never had the conversations with us, then we couldn't have been able to protect her, and we couldn't. But it all starts with just being able to communicate with somebody. And if it's not the somebody, your parents, then it needs to be an organization, just like Chandra's organization, just like Hey Brave Girl.
Investigator Chandra Cleveland has been walking alongside this family during their grief. She says people need to speak up.
Don't let your pride get you killed, because there are times and places and organizations out here who can help you.
That's all I'm here to do, is give someone some experience with what I'm going through, some strength on how to lean on God to get it, and some hope that 365 days today is not going to be the same not even 366 tomorrow, because my feet are on the ground and I'm running toward domestic violence, toward gun violence, toward anything that's going to help the generations, my grandbabies and the grandbabies behind me, people I know and people I don't know.
Kenardo Bates was charged with Jalen's murder, kidnapping, and possession of a weapon during a violent crime. In connection with her death, he is still in jail.
Jalen Hasty was a 29-year-old woman at the time of her death in August 2023. Jalen was born and raised in South Carolina. She spent her early life in Columbia, where she remained throughout her adulthood. Her Her childhood was shaped within a close family setting, with strong ties to her mother and siblings. She attended local schools in Columbia and graduated from high school before pursuing further education. Jalen earned qualifications that allowed her to secure employment within community-based and service-oriented industries. Her education positioned her for steady work and contributed to her reputation as a reliable and hard-working individual. Jalen worked in various professional settings. Most notably, she held a role in the business and retail sector, where she gained recognition for her commitment to her job. She also had involvement in industries tied to event promotion and customer service, where she developed connections across different social and professional networks. Her career path reflected steady progression and adaptability in different work environments. Jalen was active in her local community and maintained close ties with friends and colleagues. She was described as dependable in social and professional circles. Her presence was recognized within Columbia's community, where she contributed not only through her work, but also through her role as a mother and family member. Jalen came from a supportive family background. Her mother, Monica Hatton Tatum, played a central role in her life and later became one of the key voices advocating on her behalf after her death. Jalen was also a mother herself, raising a daughter. Her role as a parent formed a significant part of her daily life and responsibilities. Prior to her death, Jalen maintained a lifestyle centered on her work, her family, and her social network. She balanced her employment responsibilities with raising her daughter and remained actively engaged with relatives and friends. Accounts suggest she lived a structured and routine-oriented life, with stability being an important aspect of her environment. Jalen's personal life included significant relationships, the most prominent of which was her involvement with Kenardo Bates. Their relationship became central to the events that led to her death. The relationship began prior to 2023 and continued over several years, with periods of stability and conflict. The dynamics of this relationship became increasingly concerning to those around her as time progressed. Jalen and Bates began their relationship in Columbia, South Carolina. They met through social connections, and the relationship quickly developed into a long-term partnership. Over time, they became closely involved, with Bates playing a visible role in Jalen's life. However, the relationship was also marked by tension and warning signs that would later draw concern from family and investigators. The relationship between Jalen and Bates experienced numerous challenges. These included arguments, periods of separation, and reported controlling behavior from Bates. Investigators and family later confirmed evidence of coercion, surveillance, and stalking. Reports also indicate that Bates demonstrated manipulative tendencies, including gaslighting and attempts to isolate Jalen from others. These documented challenges became key factors in the narrative leading up to the crime. The suspect in this case was identified as Kenardo Bates, a 31-year-old male at the time of the incident. Prior to his arrest, Bates resided in Columbia, South Carolina, within proximity to Jalen. His presence in the same city contributed to his access to the victim and his ability to maintain surveillance and contact. Bates' family background included connections in the Columbia area. While detailed information about his upbringing is limited, available reports indicate that he maintained some level of contact with relatives. His family situation, however, played little role in the official investigation compared to his behavior toward Jalen. Bates' employment history was inconsistent. He had held jobs in the past, but reports highlight instability in his professional life. His career path did not follow a stable trajectory, and this instability was noted as a factor in his personal life. Public records do not indicate significant prior criminal convictions, but investigators later focused on his behavioral patterns rather than an extensive criminal record. His actions toward Jalen, including stalking and controlling tendencies, became the most documented aspects of his background relevant to this case. Bates' relationship with Jalen extended over a period of years. While it initially appeared to be a committed partnership, it deteriorated over time. Bates exhibited jealousy, possessiveness, and controlling behavior that escalated as the relationship progressed. Family and close observers later confirmed these patterns, which became central in explaining the event of August 2023. Bates demonstrated several recurring behaviors during his time with Jalen. These included frequent monitoring of her activities, attempts to control her social interactions, and repeated efforts to maintain dominance in their relationship. These behaviors were described as persistent and increased in intensity in the period leading up to Jalen's death. Reports indicate that Bates engaged in stalking behavior toward Jalen. This included following her movements, monitoring her communications, and keeping track of her daily activities. Family members and investigators later emphasized this as a major red flag. He also engaged in coercive tactics, including verbal manipulation and intimidation. Jalen Hasty and Kenardo Bates had been in a romantic relationship prior to the homicide. Sources close to the case confirmed that the relationship was no longer stable in the weeks before the crime. The two had separated, and Bates was identified as struggling with the end of the relationship. The approximate timeline of their separation places it in the weeks before August 2023. During this period, there were multiple signs of strain. Arguments between Jalen and Bates were noted in the weeks leading to the incident. These conflicts reportedly involved verbal disputes and issues related to control. Witnesses and family members indicated that Bates had displayed increasing frustration as Jalen attempted to move forward independently. There were also allegations that disputes escalated beyond normal disagreements and crossed into patterns of intimidation. Evidence and testimonies revealed stalking activity carried out by Bates. This included repeated attempts to monitor Jalen's movements after their separation. Reports state that Bates followed her physically and attempted to track her daily routine. There were allegations of surveillance near her residence and continued attempts to maintain access to her personal space. These actions raised concerns of escalation from verbal conflict to physical threat. Bates alleged monitoring extended beyond casual encounters. Private investigator input highlighted specific red flags, such as checking Jalen's location, following her to places she frequented, and appearing without invitation. This type of surveillance was presented as a consistent pattern in the weeks prior to the crime. Evidence gathered indicated that Jalen may have been aware of being monitored, adding pressure to her sense of personal safety. In the period leading to the crime, there is no public record of Jalen securing a restraining order. However, discussions within her family and with investigators suggest that she recognized the red flags of escalating control. Her separation from Bates itself was a form of protective measure designed to create distance. There are also indications that she spoke to her family about Bates' controlling behavior, which placed her family on heightened alert. August 20th to 21st, 2023, Jalen was continuing her routine at her apartment in Columbia. Bates was reportedly attempting to contact her through calls and messages. Witnesses claimed that his presence near her apartment was observed during this time. August 22nd, 2023, the day before the incident, Bates was seen near the Heron Lake apartment complex. Reports suggest he was in communication with Jalen, though the interactions were tense. Evidence indicates he had knowledge of her schedule and movements. Early hours of August 23rd, 2023, Bates' actions indicated premeditation. Witness accounts and investigative reports note that he was present in the vicinity of the apartment complex. His behavior suggested he was waiting for an opportunity to confront her directly. The final interactions between Jalen and Bates are believed to have occurred through direct confrontation. Bates reportedly attempted to engage with her on the day of the homicide. While the exact dialogue between them is not recorded, the confrontation escalated inside her apartment, leading to the fatal outcome. The homicide occurred inside Jalen Hasty's residence at the Heron Lake apartment complex in Columbia, South Carolina. This location became the primary crime scene, secured by Richland County law enforcement. The incident unfolded during the evening hours of August 23rd, 2023. Law enforcement was called to the scene after reports of shots fired within the apartment complex. Neighbors reported hearing loud noises consistent with gunfire before police arrival. Authorities were notified by emergency calls from residents of the Heron Lake apartments. Multiple callers reported disturbances, with the sound of gunshots being the primary trigger for immediate response. The Columbia Police Dispatch Center sent units to the complex shortly after the first calls were logged. Investigative findings show that Bates entered Jalen's apartment without consent. The method of entry is believed to be forced or unauthorized. Once inside, Bates confronted Jalen. The confrontation escalated rapidly into violence. The details suggest that Bates was armed with a firearm upon entry. Inside the apartment, Bates produced a firearm and fired at Jalen Hasty. She sustained gunshot wounds that resulted in her death at the scene. The sequence of shots and trajectory analysis were confirmed by forensic teams. There is no evidence that anyone else was present in the apartment during the shooting. After shooting Jalen, Bates turned the firearm on himself. He sustained a self-inflicted gunshot wound but did not die at the scene. When law enforcement arrived, he was found injured. He was immediately transported to a nearby hospital for treatment under police custody. His injuries were consistent with an attempted suicide following the homicide. Upon arrival, law enforcement secured the perimeter of the Heron Lake apartment complex. Officers discovered Jalen's body inside her apartment. She had multiple gunshot wounds and showed no signs of life. Bates was found nearby with his injury. The apartment showed evidence of forced entry, conflict, and firearm discharge. The weapon used in the homicide was recovered at the scene. Emergency medical personnel arrived shortly after law enforcement. Jalen Hasty was officially declared deceased at the scene. The cause of death was identified as gunshot wounds. Bates was stabilized at the scene before being transported for medical treatment. An autopsy was later conducted to confirm cause and manner of death. The results aligned with the forensic findings of the crime scene investigation. Inside the residence where the shooting occurred, the firearm used in the incident was recovered. The weapon was located close to the body of the suspect, who was alive but injured, suggesting it had been used both in the shooting of the victim and in the subsequent self-inflicted injury. The firearm was immediately secured, unloaded, and logged as evidence by forensics officers. Following recovery of the firearm, investigators conducted a ballistics analysis. The weapon was matched against the shell casings and projectiles found inside the apartment. Test firing confirmed that the recovered firearm was the same weapon used in the fatal shooting of Jalen Hasty. Trajectory studies were also carried out to establish the position of the shooter, the distance of the shots, and the sequence of firing. An autopsy was conducted on the victim, confirming the cause of death as gunshot wounds. The report detailed the number of entry wounds, the location on the body, and the trajectory paths of the bullets. The autopsy results were consistent with close-range firing, aligning with the evidence gathered at the scene. The official cause of death was ruled as homicide by firearm. A toxicology report was also completed as part of the standard procedure. The results showed no substances that would have impaired the victim at the time of her death. This finding ruled out the possibility of external influences, such as drugs or alcohol, contributing to the victim's condition during the incident. The forensic team then focused on a comprehensive collection of evidence. This included fingerprints on the weapon, DNA swabs from surfaces inside the apartment, gunshot residue testing, and recovery of personal belongings. Blood samples were taken from both the victim and the suspect to aid in timeline reconstruction. Electronic devices, such as mobile phones, were seized for further examination. Investigators also documented the suspect's injury, which was determined to be self-inflicted. Medical personnel confirmed that the gunshot wound sustained by Bates was consistent with an attempted suicide following the homicide. The angle, placement, and residue testing matched this conclusion, which helped eliminate alternative theories of another person being involved in the shooting. Another critical aspect of the investigation was the review of surveillance footage. Security cameras installed around the Heron Lake apartment complex provided valuable information. The footage showed Bates entering the property and approaching the apartment before the shooting occurred. No evidence of additional individuals entering or exiting during the relevant time frame was found. This further corroborated the narrative that the homicide was an isolated domestic violence case involving only the victim and the suspect. Law enforcement also collected witness statements from neighbors and residents. Several residents reported hearing loud noises, including raised voices followed by multiple gunshots. Others stated they saw Bates in the vicinity of the complex earlier that evening. These witness accounts were consistent with the physical evidence gathered and strengthened the reconstruction of events. Finally, investigators conducted a timeline reconstruction of the shooting. Based on surveillance footage, forensic evidence, and witness statements, authorities determined that Bates entered the apartment during the late evening hours. An argument reportedly escalated inside the residence, culminating in Bates firing multiple rounds at Hasty. After the victim was incapacitated, Bates turned the firearm on himself in an attempted suicide. Emergency calls were made shortly after the gunshots, and law enforcement arrived within minutes, finding Hasty deceased and Bates injured. This meticulous documentation of the crime scene and related evidence built the foundation for the subsequent legal actions against Bates. Following the incident, Bates was transported to a hospital for immediate treatment of his self-inflicted gunshot wound. He remained under medical supervision for a period of time, with law enforcement maintaining security during his recovery. His condition was stabilized, allowing authorities to begin preparing formal charges once doctors cleared him for transfer. Upon his release from medical care, Bates was transferred into law enforcement custody. The official handover took place under secure conditions to prevent flight risk or interference. Officers documented his transfer through standard booking procedures, and he was transported to a detention facility in Richland County. The date and location of the official arrest were confirmed by the sheriff's office as occurring shortly after his release from the hospital in late August 2023. The arrest was publicly reported, with law enforcement confirming the charges against him in relation to the death of Jalen Hasty, murder for the intentional killing of Jalen Hasty, kidnapping for allegedly restricting the victim's freedom within the apartment prior to the shooting, possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime, for the use of a firearm in a homicide. Prosecutors also reviewed additional charges based on the evidence of prior stalking, coercion, and possible violations related to domestic violence statutes. While the primary charges were centered on homicide and kidnapping, the ongoing investigation left open the possibility of expanding the list of criminal counts. Statements from law enforcement classified the case as a domestic violence-related homicide. Sheriff Leon Lott and investigators emphasized that the evidence supported a clear pattern of coercive control and eventual escalation to lethal violence. Authorities pointed to witness reports, surveillance footage, and forensic evidence as confirming Bates' direct responsibility for crime. Once in custody, Bates underwent standard booking procedures. This included fingerprinting, photographing, and processing into the detention facility. The booking documents reflected the three primary charges, along with his personal information and details of the offense. Detention was ordered without immediate bond due to the severity of the charges and the violent nature of the offense. Bates remained in custody awaiting preliminary hearings, where further details of the prosecution's case would be presented. The booking records indicated a high-profile classification of the case, requiring additional security measures within the detention center. As details became public, local television stations, newspapers, and online media outlets highlighted the link between Hasty's death and domestic violence. Reporters referenced official statements made by investigators, including Sheriff Leon Lott, who stressed that the case reflected a broader societal issue. In multiple press briefings, Sheriff Lott underscored the availability of domestic violence resources within Richland County and urged those experiencing similar circumstances to seek assistance through organizations such as Sister Cares. These statements frame the homicide not as an isolated crime, but as part of a recurring pattern of domestic violence incidents in South Carolina. Domestic violence organizations began using the case as an example in their campaigns to raise awareness. Advocacy groups issued press releases, participated in interviews, and conducted community forums to explain how coercive control can escalate to lethal violence. They focus on specific patterns identified in the relationship between Hasty and Bates. Reports indicated that Bates exhibited behaviors such as stalking, isolating the victim from her support network, and attempting to monitor her activities. These patterns were presented in media coverage as indicators of coercive control that, if unrecognized, can place individuals at higher risk. The media provided consistent attention to these red flags. Outlets such as WACH, WLTX, and WIS included expert commentary explaining how gaslighting, surveillance, and intimidation function within abusive relationships. This focus shifted the narrative away from a crime scene alone and toward the underlying factors that led to the homicide. Articles and television segments frequently mention how stalking and psychological control precede physical violence, using the Hasty case as a demonstrative example. Coverage spread beyond local reporting into state-level news, as South Carolina has long been ranked among the states with high rates of domestic violence fatalities. Statewide publications tied the incident into broader statistics, highlighting how many women in South Carolina are killed each year by intimate partners. The attention placed additional pressure on public officials and law enforcement to address domestic violence prevention measures. Press conferences played a significant role in maintaining awareness. Sheriff Lott held multiple media briefings where he spoke directly about warning signs, available hotlines, and the importance of community vigilance. These conferences were covered by all major local stations, ensuring that the public consistently received updated information not only about the progress of the case, but also about the issue of domestic violence as a whole. By the weeks following a homicide, the case had moved from an individual crime story into a larger discussion point across news outlets, law enforcement agencies, and advocacy organizations. The consistent framing of the incident as a domestic violence-related homicide elevated public awareness and encouraged dialogue about preventative steps, resources, and early intervention. While public attention increased, the family of Jalen Hasty initiated their own efforts to address what had happened. Her mother, Monica Hatton Tatum, made statements identifying clear red flags that had emerged during her daughter's relationship with Bates. She emphasized that Bates' behavior was controlling and that his conduct showed multiple signs of possessiveness and manipulation. These public statements reinforced a message that recognizing warning signs is critical. The family made the decision to use the case as an educational tool for broader awareness campaigns. Hatton Tatum repeatedly stated that silence around domestic violence creates more risk, and she aligned the family's public remarks with the messaging from advocacy groups and law enforcement. Through interviews, she highlighted the need for increased public recognition of stalking, gaslighting, and isolation tactics. To further strengthen their advocacy efforts, the family worked with private investigator Chunder Cleveland. Cleveland provided professional assessments of the warning signs in Jalen's relationship. She pointed to specific behaviors such as Bates allegedly isolating Jalen from friends and family, monitoring her whereabouts, and manipulating her perception of reality through gaslighting. Cleveland explained that these actions are common in abusive dynamics and can often escalate to violence if not addressed. Her role gave the family's statements additional credibility, as she was able to outline the situation in precise, investigative terms. Community involvement grew quickly. Vigils were held in Jalen's memory, often including balloon releases and gatherings organized by both family members and supporters. These events not only commemorated her life, but also functioned as platforms to discuss domestic violence and encourage preventive action. Attendees were provided with resources, hotline numbers, and contacts for advocacy groups. In 2025, the family formalized their efforts through the establishment of a nonprofit organization named A Voice for J. Sarah. The nonprofit was designed to ensure that Jalen's legacy carried forward into ongoing advocacy and support for domestic violence victims. Its stated mission included spreading awareness, offering scholarships, and organizing events to educate the public. Scholarship programs were introduced under the nonprofit as a way of linking Jalen's memory to opportunities for others. These scholarships were intended for students, with a focus on those who demonstrated commitment to community service and awareness of domestic violence issues. The program served a dual purpose, honoring Jalen while extending educational support to others in her name. Annual memorial events became part of the family's advocacy work. These included balloon releases and butterfly ceremonies, where community members gathered to mark the anniversary of Jalen's death. In addition, the family organized the Purple Fire Charity Ride, a motorcycle and community event that both honored her memory and raised funds for domestic violence awareness campaigns. Through these activities, the family moved beyond private grieving into public advocacy, consistently emphasizing the importance of recognizing warning signs in relationships. Their efforts ensured that the case remained active in public discussion well beyond the original media cycle. By institutionalizing advocacy through the nonprofit and annual events, the family created a framework that continues to draw attention to domestic violence and reinforces the lessons of the Hasty case. Bates' first court appearance occurred shortly after his release from medical care. During this appearance, charges of murder, kidnapping, and possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime were officially read. The court also addressed issues related to representation and Bates was provided with legal counsel for his defense. At the preliminary hearings, prosecutors laid out the probable cause evidence tying Bates to the crime. Bail was a significant point of discussion. Due to the severity of the charges, the nature of the alleged offense, and Bates' documented control over the victim prior to her death, the prosecution argued against granting bail. Judges reviewing the case determined that the risk factors outweighed any possibility of conditional release, leading to his continued detention without bond. The prosecution outlined a case built on multiple categories of evidence. First, they cited eyewitness and neighbor testimony about disturbances at the Heron Lake apartment complex on the night of the incident. Second, forensic evidence from the recovered firearm was presented as a direct link between Bates and the homicide. Third, the prosecution referenced prior reports and witness statements that demonstrated patterns of stalking and coercive behavior by Bates toward the victim. This formed the basis of their claim that the crime was premeditated and connected to a broader pattern of domestic violence. While Bates' defense counsel did not release a comprehensive public strategy, court records indicated a line of argument focusing on mental state at the time of the incident. Early indications suggested that the defense might raise issues concerning Bates' intent or capacity, potentially attempting to reduce the charges or argue for lesser culpability. No plea of guilty or not guilty was initially reported at the early hearings. During pre-trial motions, the prosecution presented forensic analyses, including ballistic testing that confirmed the firearm matched the weapon recovered at the scene. Surveillance footage from the apartment complex was also introduced, placing Bates at the location at the relevant time. Digital evidence, including phone records, was prepared to establish contact patterns between Bates and the victim prior to the incident. The defense filed motions to suppress certain pieces of evidence, though outcomes of these motions remain pending. The state prepared to call law enforcement officers, forensic experts, medical examiners, and individuals familiar with the relationship between Bates and Hasty. Witnesses included family members and neighbors who had observed interactions between the victim and the suspect, as well as domestic violence specialists to contextualize patterns of coercive behavior. Court documents indicated that the trial was expected to proceed after multiple pre-trial hearings, with dates subject to change based on the volume of evidence and legal motions. Preliminary hearings and evidence reviews extended into 2024, pushing the trial timeline into late 2024 or beyond. If convicted of murder, Bates faced a potential life sentence without parole under South Carolina law. The additional kidnapping charge carried its